Hey Cities Church, Kenny Ortiz here. We've come to the end of our prison letters series, and this was going to come from the book of Philemon. The book of Philemon has become one of my favorite books in the Bible for various reasons. It's unique from the rest of the New Testament letters. In my opinion, it is the most personal and most intimate letter that the Apostle Paul wrote that we have in the New Testament. And so if you're not familiar, the Apostle Paul is writing this letter to a man by the name of Philemon. And in the letter, he is making an appeal to another man by the name of Onesimus. And it is clear as we read the letter that Paul and Onesimus had developed an incredibly close friendship, really more of a father-son relationship. Paul had been a mentor and father figure in the life of Onesimus. And Paul clearly loves Onesimus tremendously. He literally calls him my very heart. And this incredibly beautiful, affectionate language that Paul uses to describe Onesimus. And so Onesimus and Paul have this great relationship, but it's clear that Onesimus has some baggage. There's some things in his past, some unfinished business, so to speak. And it's clear that at some point, Paul and Onesimus determined that it is best for Onesimus to go back to where he came from to rectify some of the wrongs, to kind of reconcile a fracture or a fractured relationship from his past. And that fractured relationship was with a man by the name of Philemon. And so Paul is writing this letter to Philemon as a means of encouragement and exhortation to Philemon to encourage Philemon to take Onesimus back. We don't know a lot of the details about the events and the circumstances that happened between Philemon and Onesimus. You know, different scholars and commentators have different opinions, but we don't really know all the details of what went down. You could say there was damage in his wake. And it's obvious that the Apostle Paul wants Onesimus to go back and to reconcile this relationship with Philemon. So Onesimus is on his way back, but of course this letter is sent by Paul to Philemon ahead of Onesimus as a means to, again, encourage and exhort Philemon in this situation. And there's one particular statement that the Apostle Paul makes in verse 15 that I really want to hone in on for a moment, that I think it's probably the statement that shouts to me what the Apostle Paul believes. You see, this letter is unique in various ways, but one of the other ways it's unique from the other New Testament epistles is that this letter doesn't really overtly teach theology, right? In all the other New Testament epistles, the Apostle Paul is clearly teaching theology and doctrine, and he's exhorting the churches to embrace the doctrine that he's teaching them. But just because overt doctrine's not being taught doesn't mean that doctrine is absent, by no means. What we actually see, however, from Paul is a statement that really shouts to us Paul's doctrine. It's clear to me that Paul's words are rooted in a particular theology. His doctrine is informing these words that he is giving to Philemon. And the phrase he says in verse 15 that I think teaches us what the Apostle Paul believes is a simple phrase where he says, perhaps. Perhaps this is why he was departed from you for a while, so that you could have him back now, not as a bondservant, but more than a bondservant, but as a beloved brother in the Lord. That's what verse 15 says. Another English translation puts it this way. It says, it seems you were separated from Onesimus for a while so that you could have him back as a brother forever. This is really beautiful language from the Apostle Paul. But I think what it shows us is that the Apostle Paul believes that what went down between Philemon and Onesimus was not an accident. I think when we read through this letter, it becomes obvious to me that the Apostle Paul happens to believe that this situation didn't catch God off guard. It wasn't like God was shocked or surprised when Onesimus did what he did and fled. Paul is saying, hey, Philemon, maybe this is the exact reason why all this went down in the first place. The reason why God providentially ushers you through this painful situation is because God had a purpose on the other side of that pain. To say it this way, it seems like the Apostle Paul is telling Philemon, God has a purpose for your pain. That was true for Philemon then, and it's certainly true for us today. God is not caught off guard when bad things happen. God is not shocked or surprised when calamity and tragedy strike. Many people right now are asking that question, why? In the midst of this global pandemic with the spread of coronavirus and all of the ripple effects that this is having for people all over the world. People are asking, why, God, why? Because God has a purpose for our pain. This was true for Philemon. This is true for us today. Nothing happens by accident. Nothing is a waste. If something bad is in your life, it's because God has sovereignly allowed it. And if God has sovereignly allowed it, it's because God has a great, good purpose for it in your life. Christian, may that encourage you and comfort you as you face any painful situation in your life.